it shows up and he puts out a song called Coffin for Head of State.
If you got death in a pouch, a fanny pack per se, it's ready to go.
Right there.
I've met a couple old dudes that carry death in their pouch. Let's just put it that way. You are listening to Tape Spaghetti, the podcast about the twisted and tangled innards of the music industry. Some of this content may not be for all listeners or viewers, so if it's not for you, no harm, no foul. We'll just catch you on the next one. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Here we go.
Hello, everybody, and welcome, as always, to Tape Spaghetti. I am Scott Marquardt, and I am here joined by the lovely, the handsome, the intelligent Blake Weiland.
Who? You must be talking about a different Blake.
Oh, that was my earlier meeting. I'm sorry. I got mixed up there. That's my bad.
That does actually lead to a slightly very off topic, but it's kind of funny story.
We have no topic, so it can't be off topic. We just started.
This is true.
You go ahead.
True. Yeah. The library, we've been going to it a lot more as of late, which I think is a good thing. Like it's a great resource. The library rules. But I took my kids there and put some books on hold for Rocky. And my wife went in to get her books that she put on hold a couple days later and was like, what in the world? Who's this other person with Weiland for the last name that wants the same books that my kid wants? Not remembering that I was just there.
It couldn't possibly be my husband. He doesn't
and then
read.
I was like, she calls me in last night to tell me this. And I'm like, oh, yes, I wonder which other Weiland in this rather small town we live in could also want the same books that your child wants. I wonder who that could be. And I just saw it dawn on her like, oh, that's who.
I have not been to the library in at least since I moved to Nashville, but growing up, the Carmel Library, north of Indianapolis, was chiefly responsible for a lot of my becoming a big music nerd. Because I would go there, and in those days there were just racks upon racks of CDs, and you could rent CDs, and so I would browse through, and I think I could rent 10 at a time. So I would always go and I'd end up with 20, and then I'd have to kind of whittle it down. And I'd take those 10 home and I could rent them for a week. So I would make sure to listen to every single one. And it would be cool. It would lead me to weird places. I'd be like, what's this band, Air? And they seem French. And I'm like, okay, I'll check it out. And I'm 12 at the time. Just sort of randomly checking whatever album cover grabs my eye, or if I'd heard about somebody from something. And it was great. It was just the fact that it expired in a week, the fact that I had these 10 CDs that I had to listen to, I think really kind of forced me to actually do it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a really good point, because even if you bought a record, you didn't have anybody saying you must listen to this now. But that little sense of urgency it provided is kind of cool.
Yeah.
I didn't get a lot of CDs from the library as a kid. I got some, but I got a lot of music related books and things like that, which we've kind of talked about here and there on the podcast. But I love our local library. I just hadn't really gone in it in years. I feel like a big geek when I go in there. I'm like, whoa, and I can just take all this home. This is crazy. It's kind of wild. I love the library. I'm a big fan.
Yeah, and now you can rent through Kindles and stuff. You can rent ebooks through the library. My wife does that a lot, and will just wait on something, and then it'll be released to her for 2 weeks or something. And similarly, she has to read it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's great. Ours has a library of things. So if you need a weed whacker or something,
this. Yeah, you can borrow tools and stuff like that.
Yeah, you just go in there and they've got random things that things you wouldn't need all the time, but would be really handy today. And
that is so many tools too, where you're I really need a tile saw for the next 48 hours, right? And not ever again after that.
I just had that with a 3-jaw puller. Fortunately, AutoZone does a very similar thing, but you got to leave them a deposit.
Yeah. My father-in-law has a tile saw that he bought one time to do tile and swore to never do again. And he's always trying to tacitly encourage me to redo the tiling in my bathroom just so he can have somebody to borrow that tile saw and justify its existence. I have not taken him up on this thus far.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have to do tiling, wouldn't recommend it. It's not fun.
It seems awful. It seems like something that I would like to pay somebody else to do personally.
And then if you don't do it right, you're just looking at crooked tiles for the rest of your life.
That's the thing. And even the people that are like pros at this do that sometimes.
Yeah. I have done a bit of tiling in my day. And I'm not saying I'll never do it again, but I'd prefer not to. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Same here. Well, changing gears from Home Improvement.
I thought you were going to say
entirely.
I thought you were going to say, speaking of tiles, we're talking about.
Oh, I was looking for a tile in, if you will, but I could not really find one. I thought about forcing a long one, but I'm just going to jump right into it.
Let's do it.
You strike me as a man that has spent a fair bit of time listening to quote unquote punk music.
I think that is a fair assessment.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah.
So, you know, obviously all the different eras and ranges of punk. But then, there's kind of the original birth of punk in like 1977, 76, 77 is kind of this big era. Do you have, so like at that time, and this is a whole other episode, but I think it's kind of unfair to really say that like punk started at this point. I think like the Stooges had existed for a long time, and I don't know what's more punk than Iggy and the Stooges, but as the typical telling goes, you've got the Clash, the Ramones, and the Sex Pistols. These are the punk bands. Which is your favorite?
Oh, out of those three, I like the attitude and idea of the Sex Pistols, probably the best, but legitimately the one I listen to the most by far is the Clash.
Same. The Clash are far and away. Like, and honestly, I'm not even sure. It's odd to me that the Clash are grouped in to punk in some ways. Like, obviously they have a lot of the political ideals of punk, but musically it's very different. They're very diverse. They had horns happening and all sorts of like interesting, rich instrumentation that was occurring, which is very different from the Ramones and the Sex Pistols at the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I love all of those bands. I mean, and Iggy and the Stooges, I think it's definitely you could make an argument that it's them. I think they're one of the ones that popularized the idea and attitude, but maybe we're going to get into this. I don't know where we're going with this, but there's a band that I found out about much, much later, at probably about the same time as everybody else did, called Death, and not the death metal band, but the like very punk rock band called Death. And they're great. And they were even a little before the Stooges, which is crazy.
Wow. Yeah. And I mean,
if my memory is serving correctly, that is.
There's a lot of that, even with like Louie and Wooly Bully and stuff like that. There's like some very punkish things happening even before like the Stooges and stuff. But yeah, it's strange how musical history gets kind of subdivided and assigned and stuff. But I wanted to draw us into one particular year, which is 1977. Okay.
Pause real quick, because I have to tell you this, because I don't know if you know this about me.
Okay, hit me.
You mentioned Louie. I interviewed Mike Mitchell from the Kingsmen years ago, sitting in a cigar bar here in Portland with my buddy Jess.
That's fun.
Yeah. He's since passed, but that is like a kind of I don't know about a crowning achievement, but it's a rather cool little feather in the cap for me. I was like, that was a fun interview. We're just in there smoking cigars, and it was a good time. It's on the Tone Mob podcast.
And for those yes, dear listener, you can find this via Blake's other podcast, The Tone Mob.
I just every time Louie comes up, I have to hold on, everyone. Did you know this about me?
Yeah, how could you not? Of course. Well, anyway,
77.
1977 is this sort of like seminal year in punk. You have like the Sex Pistols, you have the Ramones, you have the Clash, all putting out records. You have Rocket to Russia, and the Clash are self-titled, and Nevermind the Bollocks that all come out in that year. And so this is kind of seen as the birth year. And one thing, is like, even in these very early albums, there's a lot of like political activism, specifically from the Clash and the Sex Pistols. So, you have the Clash putting out was that London's? That's not London Calling. It's London's Burning. Am I right on the self-titled?
On the self-titled one, I think London's Burning is on London Calling, which gets a little confusing too. I get it mixed up, to be perfectly honest, especially in the days of them. In the days of streaming, where I'm just like, I want to hear this song now. Click.
And of course, on the Sex Pistols side, you have Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen that are coming out here. So you have these big, sort of dangerous political statements that are happening in 1977. But what I have come here today, Blake, to assert to you is that the punkest thing that happens in music in 1977 happens a continent away and many, many genres away from what's happening in UK and New York punk.
Okay. My body is ready. Let's go.
I think that the punkest song that happens in this era is effectively a jazz song.
All right. You have my attention, good sir. I'm ready.
Let that sink in a little bit. All right. So, meanwhile, I was letting a pregnant pause happen there, but I think I can pick it up now. Meanwhile, a continent away in Africa, there's a very, very different thing happening with Fela Kuti. Are you familiar with Fela Kuti?
Nope.
Oh, that's amazing. I didn't prep you at all, but Fela is among my very favorite musicians in the entire world.
Okay.
And I'm going to tell you all about him.
I feel like I know a lot of your favorite musicians, and somehow this one has not came up.
That's amazing. Yeah. Well, today it comes up.
All right. Well, last night I spent a good amount of time listening to the Congos because of you, so I'm ready for more.
Love that record. All right. Well, we're diving deeper into quote unquote world music.
All right.
I want to take you to a flashpoint in 1977 where a song is recorded that is, every bit, if not even more, as political as those songs that I mentioned earlier that are happening in the UK, but carries with it a lot more real tangible results. And in my mind is a much braver, much punker thing than is happening. So I'm going to jump right into that song and its immediate aftermath. And then I'm going to kind of rewind a little bit and tell you the story of kind of how we got to there and where we went afterwards.
Okay.
Sound all right?
Let's go. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So we're going to be talking about Nigeria and just a little bit of context, like before we jump into 1977 exactly. So Nigeria had been under like various different military dictatorships in the like late 1960s and early 1970s. There was some skullduggery afoot, as you would imagine, from military juntas and things like that. Everything was very politically fragile. A general basically served as the head of state. His name and pronunciation here is going to come up a lot in this particular episode. But I'm going to read this as Olusegun Obasanjo was the general head of state after the assassination of the previous head of state. So you have like a military-run head of state at this time. The military, as militaries tend to when they are like the seat of power in a country, is, repressing a lot of things. They're censoring things. There's violence, intimidation.
You don't
things
say.
Like that.
Really?
Yeah, that thing that kind of tends to come up. Meanwhile, there's a guy named Fela Kuti, and we'll talk all about his whole history because it's all very interesting. But as of this time, he is by far the most popular musician, certainly in Nigeria and really in almost all of Africa. And he takes issue with this particular regime and had been doing so for quite some time. He was a real thorn in their side, which we'll get into deeper and deeper and deeper. But specifically, Fela cuts this song. And it's like late 1976 at this time, even though the album came out a little bit later. And this song is called Zombie. Have you heard of the song Zombie? It's like a 13-minute or even maybe a touch longer Afrobeat, jazzy, funky, crazy thing with like pidgin English happening over top of it.
So not the Cranberries.
Not the Cranberries Zombie, which is also a really, really great zombie.
Yes.
But this Zombie particularly is not only like an amazing musical song, but it has these like very intense lyrics. So he's speaking directly to the members of the Nigerian military, the foot soldiers specifically, because from his perspective, you have this military that's kind of controlling everything in the whole country, repressing its people and doing all this bad stuff. But of course, a military can't do anything without a bunch of willing and compliant boots on the ground to actually enforce it. And the boots on the ground, as typically are made up by middle and lower class, typically people that are doing this. So from Fela's perspective, all these people are enabling this military to have power. So he makes a song called Zombie, and the zombie in this song are those foot soldiers. So he says, go on march, quick march, slow march, left turn, right turn, attention. And after each one of those, his backup singers are saying zombie, basically saying all these military, soldiers they're zombies. They're just doing exactly what they're told. And he drives this home like again and again and again. One of the big refrains in the song is "Zombie not going to think unless you tell him to think." Basically, so he's really, really making this very clear that these people they're just doing whatever they're told and aren't thinking it through or anything like that. And the song underneath it is this great, funky, like hypnotic sort of song that's really catchy, but it's just so cutting and so direct. The lyrics that are happening. The song resonates super deeply with the public that's there in Nigeria, especially the youth. It's actually banned from the radio, but street vendors are selling it.
Of course it is. Yes.
Yeah. The way that usually goes. Fela's playing live shows. It kind of does that thing when the government tries to like stem this the popularity of the song. It takes on a life of its own.
If you want anything to be popular, go ahead and ban it.
Yes, that is always the way that it works, right? When Tipper Gore comes up with that like PMRC parental advisory label, you just signal to all kids, you really want this record.
What did we do when we saw that record as children? We were like, maybe at your library, for instance, you were like, look what I can now direct is just a magnet. Like, all right, that's the one. That's the one I want. So I can only imagine, especially if somebody tells you, if an adult tells you, it's even worse than the sticker in some way. If somebody in authority is going, you can't have this piece of art. As a kid, you're like, I bet you I can.
Oh, yeah. There's some good stuff in there, right? Why don't they want me to have that? 100%. Well, so, you have the seeds of this political song, right? And that on its own is like, oh, okay, he's just attacking, the powers that be in the way that all sorts of musicians have through history. But the difference here is that these people are very much involved with Fela and his people. There are like violent outbursts. There are things happening. He's pointing a finger directly at the people that are, right in the same country with him and being very violent, being very repressive. He's looking at them and making this big public sort of middle finger, not just to the regime, but to the actual people themselves that are enforcing it. Right. And that's what I think is so unique about this is that like, there are consequences to what this is that don't exist in the UK or in America when you're making political songs. Right. And specifically in this case, there are very much consequences. So after this song comes out, that's just like really prodding all of the military. And February 18th, 1977, 1,000 Nigerian soldiers circle up around what Fela calls the Kalakuta Republic, which is basically his house compound. They're in Lagos, and they invade.
1,000. Okay, let me try to get some. Maybe you don't know the answer to this, but how big is this place? Are we talking about 1,000 troops surrounding, a 10,000 square foot piece of property, or is it something rather large? I'm assuming because with his popularity, he probably can afford something like that.
It's fairly large. About 70 to 80 people live there. I don't have like a square footage estimate, and you'll see why shortly. But not a small like 1,000 square foot, 3 and 2 home necessarily. Right. But also not, this is not outside of the city. This is fairly centrally located in Lagos. This is an urban core area, so it's not some massive, 300-acre compound either.
I was just trying to picture what because 1,000 troops is a lot no matter the situation, but surrounding 10 acres it's kind of spread out. Surrounding 2 acres it's rather condensed, and I'm just trying to visually picture what that looks like.
Yes. So, if you're inside this compound, you're Fela and like the rest of his, the women attached to him, his family, his band, his backup singers, of which there were very, very many, are in there. And you look out and you see 1,000 Nigerian soldiers, the people that you've just been pointing a finger and wagging at, are lining up around. And they don't stop there. As I said, they basically storm the compound. They beat everyone inside. Fela himself has like broken bones and is beaten on the floor. They rape the various women that lived there, destroy all sorts of property. It's pretty brutal. And specifically, like the one thing that's kind of the flashpoint of it is Fela's mother, who herself was like a very well-respected woman in Nigeria. She was allegedly the first woman to drive a car there, which is kind of cool.
All right.
And she was herself like a sort of feminist activist of the time. She is thrown out of a second-story window.
Whoa.
By these soldiers. So she has, broken bones, head injury, like she's literally thrown out of a window, and she's not young at this point. I don't have her exact age, but she's fairly old. And after doing all of this, the various military personnel that are there burn the entire place, including his instruments, his recording studio, the actual like master tapes of virtually everything that he had done up to that point. It's this massive moment. And while it's difficult to say what was going through Fela's head exactly at the time, I don't know that this was even necessarily unexpected. I like to think that like in recording Zombie and putting it out, he was kind of taunting and inviting this. And I don't say that in like he shouldn't have done that. But as a political activist, I think he was, trying to inflame in some way this moment to create change. Yeah,
maybe invitation's a bit of a strong word, but I would have to assume he at least knew that it was a possibility. And maybe less of a possibility and more of a likelihood.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And even there, like if he imagined that there was going to be some sort of response, I guess no one would imagine that 1,000 soldiers are going to show up at your compound.
That's what I'm saying.
Get thrown out of the second story window. This is, sort of far beyond what you would ever expect. But at the same time, the soldiers are, trying to send a very loud and clear message.
I have to imagine that it wasn't just because the general in charge, I'm not going to pretend like I'm going to be able to pronounce that name, said, go get him. I'm sure he did. But I'm sure everyone that he said go get him to was like, oh, yeah, he insulted me. Of course, I'm going to go get him.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that's kind of different is, he's not just like a London band attacking the Queen. He's attacking basically all of the people that are complicit in this regime. And those people have their own egos and, want to kind of take revenge out on it.
So that's a great example, actually, because I saw a clip recently of the Queen, meeting Brian May, and I can't remember who all, Eric Clapton, a bunch of very famous musicians from her country. And she very clearly didn't know who some of them were. So did Queen Elizabeth even hear the Sex Pistols? There's a chance she didn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I never thought about that. But I don't know that anyone was bringing that in. Like, you have to hear the song, Mum.
Yeah, if you don't know Brian May, you probably didn't get exposed to that either, most likely.
Which is odd, too, because Princess Diana was like very close friends with Freddie Mercury.
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, I don't know that she didn't know who Brian May was. It was an odd clip. I was like, she doesn't appear to recognize Paul McCartney.
Right.
So by contrast, though, everyone in that military probably heard that song.
They knew exactly who Fela Kuti was. Exactly. And so, there's an inquiry afterwards because you have this like crazy aftermath of it. And the official government inquiry blamed an unknown soldier for this.
One?
Seemingly implying that.
Oh, yeah, that was George. He's always doing things like this.
Just one bad apple, that's all it was. Everything's totally fine. I'd heard some reports separately from my research here that they said that, Fela's like followers had beaten some military personnel elsewhere and they were responding to that in this way. Whether that happened or not, it's all difficult to say. And notably, I mean, a lot of evidence is of anything that happened is burned because the whole place completely burns down. And so there's like international outcry after this. Like I actually found a New York Times article of the time writing about it. It says like, activist musician in Africa is, beaten and compound invaded and whatnot. But even despite, all of that sort of outcry, nothing happened. No one was ever held accountable and nothing ever really happened or changed. Right. But to me, this is so unique because it takes very little for me as like, living in the US to think of like criticizing my government or writing some sort of a critical song, and be like, oh, that's so punk. They're calling for anarchy, but nothing's going to happen.
No, nothing. I mean, it never really has.
Right.
Not like this anyway. Right. Nothing that can even compare, really.
But being someone who's living there in the city and seeing all of this violence that's happening from the military personnel around, and then using your mouth and your saxophone to put a big middle finger, right up to all of those people who are like all right there around you and are the ones with the guns.
Mm-hmm.
That's punk.
Yeah, that is the ethos of it for sure.
Mm-hmm.
That's this is one of those things, and I know we're gonna stumble across this for hopefully the many years we do this podcast. I'm like, how did I never hear of this ever? Even as a story in and of itself. Like, I can understand maybe not being familiar with some forms of like jazz and world music, being a punk rock kid who grew up on country music. I understand how I was never really exposed to that, but the story seems like something I should have been exposed to at some point. I've never heard about this at all.
Sweet. Well, we're going to dive even deeper because there's a bunch more. Don't you worry. But yes, I know what you're talking about. And in general, like, this is often the thing. There's stuff that happens in Africa that the Western press just cares a lot less about. At any given time, if there's like a war on the, in the Balkans or something, you're going to hear about it. Whereas like, wars in Rwanda and stuff, they just don't make the news in the same way.
Mm-hmm. And they're just as bad, and if not worse sometimes.
We discount the
really
human
rough.
toll, hearing that X number thousand of people die here versus, in Rwanda or something. It just doesn't connect with people in the press in the same way, which there's a whole bunch of reasons for that we don't have to get into on this particular thing. But I know exactly what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is wild. All right, I'm ready. I'm ready for more. Let's see what else I don't know.
Yeah. Anyway, so Fela Kuti, originally Fela Ransom Kuti, and his birth name is long and beautiful, but am going to probably butcher it, so I'm going to skip over that. But he's born in 1938 in Nigeria. His family is a fairly prominent family. They have some ties to kind of the old chieftains that ruled in that area. And even by the time, he comes around, like I said, his mother is like a fairly well-known activist. I mentioned that she was one of the first women to drive a car. They had a car, which like in 1940s in Nigeria, not a lot of people have cars, that's much less valuable. One for a lady to drive.
That is valuable context for sure. Okay.
Yeah. And she and the family in general is, fairly anti-colonialist. Again, we're even closer in this era to the era of European colonialism in Africa. His father, Reverend Israel Ransom Kuti, again, skipping a middle name that I'm going to pronounce somewhat poorly. He was a school principal and a minister as well. So Fela comes from an educated family that, has some money, is fairly well-to-do. And so he is able to be educated and really learn about all this sort of stuff. He studies medicine, but he eventually decides to enroll in music college. He studies classical music, jazz, learns to play trumpet, piano. He can play all these, different instruments. He's really well known for playing saxophone really well, but he can kind of play just about everything. And he forms his first band, in the late 60s, kind of after this, and it's called Kula Lobitos. They sound kind of like high life, which is its own form of African music, which we can talk about deeper on a future episode because I'm going to run out of things if I dive too much in. But basically, it's got some kind of minor funk and soul elements and a lot of jazz elements, with also, of course, like a lot of African elements. You have polyrhythms, a lot of just different rhythmic variety, even more so than you're seeing in kind of American funk and soul at the time. So this is him in like the kind of late 60s. He's making music. It's cool. It sounds kind of similar to some other high life stuff. But he's getting a little bit of traction. And in fact, enough that he actually is able to go to the US to tour in 1969, which is this really kind of seminal moment for him. Now, I don't know if this was like funded by his family. I can't imagine that like any old like African musician at the time could figure out how to like get a whole band on a plane and come to America to play music, especially when he's not huge. It's not like the Beatles coming to America.
Let alone trying to book a tour.
Right.
Like, showing up to America is a huge feat in and of itself in those circumstances, but having gigs? How did that happen? They didn't exactly have Instagram DMs back then.
No, and these are not small bands. And it's like, I don't know if they backlined in the US exactly or what, but they like, you've got a dozen or often dozens of people, with horns and large drums and all this sort of stuff. So like there's some logistical stuff involved in getting a band like that across an ocean to another place to play. So I don't know who funded that, but I think that that's probably one of those things that somewhat, uniquely possible because of his station and his raising in life, right? So anyway, on that U.S. tour, he goes to Los Angeles and he meets Sandra Smith, who's known as Sandra Isidore, who introduces him to Black Power literature and the Black Panthers. I've heard that she was a member of the Black Panthers at the time. So he's exposed to Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X, Stokely Carmichael, the rest of the Black Panther, kind of world. And this has like a really powerful effect on him because obviously in Africa you have similar things that American Black people in this era are like rebelling against, but often even more extreme due to like the long colonial nature of history there. So seeing, people taking this stance and really like standing up for it had this big effect on him. And he kind of realized like, oh, my music, I can do this through my music. I may not like give a speech like Malcolm X can, but I can like make politically charged music that speaks to exactly these things that are going on. Right. So he kind of picks all that up in the US and then he returns to Nigeria. And at this point, when he comes back, he's kind of not just a musician. Up to that point, really great musician, probably had some, beliefs and things that were a little bit more private. But once he comes back, he's, very openly criticizing colonialism and capitalism, military power, religion, all that sort of stuff. And he changes his name from Fela Ransom Kuti because he considers the ransom portion a colonial holdover. He considered it like his slave name. So he becomes Fela Anikulapo Kuti. There, I did that one pretty well, actually.
I think you got that, yeah.
And that word, Anikulapo, means he who carries death in his pouch.
Whoa, that's metal.
I thought you'd like that.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I like that a lot. That's good.
Yeah, pretty badass, right? So, he changes his name, and that's always like a powerful moment for anybody. And he basically is like, I'm going to liberate the minds of my fellow countrymen and then people across, West Africa and Africa in general. And I'm going to do it through music. Cool.
So coming to America was really just like him getting activated as an activist.
Totally.
Basically.
Yeah. I don't know that he, realized all that was possible. And of course, like, this is not just America. This is America in 1969.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's again, valuable context because we all know what was going on in 1969. And the answer is a lot.
Yeah. And I think it's worth noting too, like in that moment, like we now know with our modern minds, like that there were all these ideals in the late 60s and they created some sort of lasting change. But, moreover, like racism continued, for example, for many decades thereafter. But like in 1969, those ideals, Altamont hadn't happened. Everything hadn't been squashed yet.
Right.
So it did still feel even more like, oh, this change could be, 10 times what it kind of amounted to, which was still significant. But like, I think people were like, we're in the middle of a revolution.
Yeah.
We're going to change everything.
Yeah. They said as much.
Yeah, exactly. And so that still felt very possible. And that's like enticing, finding out like, oh my gosh, I can change the whole world.
Yeah. And so he probably felt very inspired. Like if they can do it there, we can do it here.
Yes, exactly. So he goes back and basically, starts a very long, or really a lifelong journey of being just a constant thorn in the side of the Nigerian government. At any given time, he is just provoking them in every way possible. Just literally constantly. So he forms what he calls the Kalakuta Republic, as well as the Africa Shrine. It's Africa with a K. So the Kalakuta Republic is that compound that I was talking about earlier. It's both kind of a physical space, but also like a symbolic sort of space. There's about like 70, 80 people that live there. A lot of them like his like dancers and musicians and backup singers, but also like spiritual healers and his whole family, like a whole mess of stuff that's happening in there, right? And it's a self-sustaining community in many ways. It has a recording studio and a pharmacy, and like a press area and all this, but still very much like downtown. And there's also this thing called the Africa Shrine, which is a nightclub that he made fairly nearby. Which was like a space for political musical expression and stuff like that. They would do these long, like 6-hour long weekly performances with new compositions and monologues and all this stuff denouncing the government. And at this time too, his like lyrics are increasingly just talking about the brutality and unfairness that's happening in Nigeria. So like basically the sum of it is he decided to start his own country effectively as he
Right.
saw it. He in fact like declared this place independent from Nigeria, even though it's right in the middle of it.
That's always a tough thing to pull off, you know?
I've seen it a few times and it rarely kind of works out. Yeah.
Yeah. It lasted about 3.5 minutes in Portland. So something like that.
I was just thinking of the free zone in Seattle, but was there one in Portland too?
They tried to do one in Portland. It lasted about 3.5 minutes. Yeah. Yeah. The one in Seattle happened and it stuck around for a while. The one in Portland fell apart rather quickly. And maybe that speaks to the true differences between Seattle dwellers and Portland.
Of which there are many.
Yeah. I can say it. I'm from Portland. Don't get mad at me.
I'm just a man from the Midwest and the South. I don't know nothing about what happens up there.
It was wild. Let's put it that way. I don't think it was as well put together as what Fela has going on, to be perfectly fair.
No, yeah, once you got a pharmacy and a press room, I mean, that's what like Sweetwater is like in our world. It's it's a whole self-sustaining ecosystem.
Yeah, this was more like it had their own palette and like maybe a few different shopping carts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I want to take just a moment because I was kind of jumping right into the political setting of what's going on, but to talk about his music. So Afrobeat is the name of the genre that Fela Kuti is generally seen as like spawning in many ways.
Okay.
And it borrows a lot of stuff from what's happening in America, both from jazz as well as funk, and these rhythms brings in those like African rhythms. And it's generally sung in what's called Pidgin English, like West African Pidgin English. Which like you'll understand like 90% or 80% of the words. The grammar's a little bit odd, but it's sung in this kind of particular tongue that takes a little bit of learning to come around to.
Most people, if they've heard it, they're probably familiar with that term from Hawaii. Like a lot of they've really embraced it there in a lot of like the luau's and stuff. It's not exactly the same, but I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and there's some like he says the word quench a lot. Like he'll be like, go on, quench. And I'm like, I don't like drink. I don't know.
But yeah. I mean, I will.
Yeah. There's some translation of cultural things there that like kind of comes up, but these songs are long. Like a 10-minute song would be really, really short in Afrobeat. They're typically like 13 to 20 or even 30 minutes. The albums. So Fela put out about 50 albums over time. But an album is generally one, maybe two songs. Because they're so long.
And that's all that fit on a vinyl record back then.
Basically, yeah. One side's one song, one side's the other. Because the other thing is if your songs are somewhere between 12 and 20 minutes, you're never going to fit two on a side, really, of an old 12-inch record. So it's basically just how long this song wants to be.
It very much feels like a product of the physical limitations of the media. Like, we'd go for longer if we could.
Oh, yeah. And live, they did. And these songs all start off, like, they typically start off soft with, like, a single horn or, like, a more, like, kind of simple rhythmic element, and they just build and build and build and add more instrumentation and more sort of polyrhythms that are happening. And no one seems to ever start singing until like, I don't know, 8-10 minutes into the song. They've got these long intros. They typically have like whole solo sections, much like happens in jazz, where you go like kind of instrument by instrument. And then it'll always like whip up into some moment. There's like always, this is just me speaking as a listener, there's always like some big crescendo moment when the vocals are singing and everything's all in and everyone's playing all together and all the rhythms are playing off of each other and it gets really wild. So they do lend themselves to powerful statements in some ways.
I just had this really funny, well, probably only funny to me, image of the general being shown this song he's supposed to be mad at, right? And just going like, when am I supposed to get mad? Like, when does he start saying, like, how far into the before they start insulting me? Do I really have to listen to this whole thing?
Well, it's kind of funny because, you know, he doesn't really insult the general exactly. It's just his foot soldiers. And it's funny that, like, you know, assumably in response to this song that they're so angry about, he's like, you guys go and kill this man and like attack his commune. And they're like, yes, sir, we'll show him that we don't simply comply with the orders.
Yeah, we're gonna really stick it to him. We're gonna show him that hold on, wait a minute, did you guys actually listen to the song? Maybe Maybe you should have listened to the song a little closer. Just a thought.
You're just doing what he said you were going to do, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, coming back to like this particular like enclave basically that he sets up, as you can imagine, the government does not like that he's like declaring his own separatist state inside of their largest city.
Right.
As they typically, as you know, from Portland and others, they don't typically like that.
It's not usually, and a lot of the citizens don't typically either, to be perfectly real.
In this case, I think the general citizenry was probably a little bit more okay with it. Because, you know, you also have like this guy's super, super famous.
Right.
At the same time. So basically, like they kind of have this long back and forth where like the pre-zombie, if you will, where the military, they're messing with him all the time. Like they raid his facilities there and, you know, cause a little trouble. He's arrested a lot. He claims that he was arrested over 200 times in his lifetime. So they're messing around with him a lot. One particular moment that I wanted to tell you about, in 1974, he was arrested for marijuana charges, and allegedly he swallowed the joint that he was smoking to destroy the evidence. So it's that old classic, like, hey, you're smoking weed, and you're like, oh, no, I'm not.
I was just picturing, I don't know, maybe this is just a very like late 90s, early 2000s things. But back when I was a youth, you know, I would imbibe in the occasional cigarette. And a lot of the guys would do the trick where they would have it on their lips and then they would stick it to their tongue and fold it inside their mouth.
Oh, God. No.
And then, but you like hold it so it kind of hovers and then you can flip it back out. So
I
like
never learned that trick. I smoked for many years and I never learned that one.
It's like, oh, the teacher's walking by. Whoop. And then you didn't want to actually throw the cigarette away or swallow it. And so it would just kind of hang back there. You could only get away with it for so long, of course. And then you could flip it back out. I tried it like once and I wasn't good enough at it, as you can imagine. And
I feel like you're either like, I feel like that's a pass fail situation. Either you do it or you burn your tongue.
Yeah, that is pretty much what happens. I mean, you can, if you're fast and you drop it on your tongue, you can kind of get it out. Like that's what I did, and I just didn't try it again. But I knew guys that could secretly hide their cigarette real quick.
That is
pull it back out.
That's really weird and also honestly kind of impressive. That's not an easy feat. I'm a little bit impressed.
My question to them was, so how did you learn you could do that?
Well, you see, I was frightened by a passing wildlife, and I thought I swallowed it, but then I realized I caught it, and I didn't.
It's an odd trick. Anyway, that was unnecessary aside.
So Fela at this moment kind of thinks like he got one over on the military because he's like, I ate it. There ain't nothing there. So they take him to jail, and they're like, yeah, you're not getting out of here until you. Can I say shit? Yeah, I'm going to say shit on this podcast. We're not censored or cleaned up for all ages listening, are we?
Well, we haven't released yet, so that remains to be discussed.
All right. Well, I'm just going to assume we're not. So the military is like, no, you can't leave until you take a shit because we're going to find a doobie in there, and then we'll get you.
I don't think that's how that works.
I tend to agree, but I know that they didn't have like, you know, CSI Gil Grissom style testing back then, but it's very much a thing. And Fela himself is worried enough about it that he gets another inmate to take a shit and then presents this stool sample as his own. So that, because I guess he was worried they'd find it as well.
We didn't find that what we were looking for, but we did find the remains of a baby mouse. Can you explain that one? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's not mine.
How'd that get in there?
Yeah.
Well, so the stool sample that he provides from another inmate is enough for him to pass and he gets released. But he makes one of my favorite songs that he does called Expensive Shit. About this, which details the whole thing basically.
Hey,
in pidgin English.
Write what you know, baby.
So, you know, the sense of this is there's a lot of run-ins. He's very familiar with these people that he's describing. They've interacted. They throw him behind bars. He gets released. They go behind bars. He gets released. And it all kind of comes to a head when the state like creates it's Festac, or I'm not sure how they would pronounce it, but it's basically like a state sponsored cultural festival with bands playing and artists and all this sort of stuff that the government wants to throw to show, oh, look at all of our amazing culture. And they want him to perform as well. Like he kind of has to, right? He's like the Elvis of this country and generally West Africa. So he's very much expected to perform. But he ain't doing that, as you may have gleaned. He ain't doing nothing for those people. And not just does he boycott it, instead, at that nightclub that he has, he creates his own counter festival to run at the same time. That includes like all sorts of international artists, like Stevie Wonder goes there to play. Okay. Yeah, because Fela is fairly well respected. So he does this, and the government, yet again, it's just like another. I picture a man turning red in the face. It's just like,
yeah, just Fela.
Exactly. Exactly. So yet again, he's like seen as undermining national pride and all this sort of stuff, and they get real upset. And this is like right leading up to the zombie moment. This is like the world that he's kind of in. So again, just in rehashing the zombie part, he puts out Zombie. Everyone comes in. Shit hits the fan. People get thrown out of windows. Things get burned down. It's really bad. And now we will pivot to the AZ, the after zombie period of this. So in response, his mother goes to the hospital and does eventually die because she was thrown out of a window yet again, I will say. And so you're Fela. What do you do, Blake?
Boy, that would, if the government literally killed my mother, I think that I would be tempted. Now, this is a hypothetical situation, Mr. FBI agent. I would be tempted to take my activism physical. Let's just put it that way.
Yes,
like I think that could be a moment that turns somebody from activism to extremism. I would think so too. Now, Fela was certainly extreme in a lot of ways, but never really engaged in that same sort of violence, as far as I can tell. He's a little too clever for that. What he does instead, he has sort of this twin response. So he delivers his mother's coffin directly to the military barracks where all of the military personnel are there in Lagos. Some people say he like carried it, but I've heard it just like it shows up, and he puts out a song called Coffin for Head of State. Whoa.
Which is itself a really badass song.
That's honestly awesome.
Yeah.
Like, that's a lot cleverer than anything I would have came up with. I'd have been like, I don't know, Molotov cocktail? Yeah. Like, that's way, and it's way more like, what's the best way to put this? So it's kind of as aggressive as throwing a Molotov cocktail, but more people are going to be sympathetic with your plight.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to use like your own mother's remains as like a political sort of spearhead.
I get the vibe though, the fact that she's there, kind of her past history. I get the vibe that she would have signed off on it. Could she have signed off on it?
I think you're probably right. She was like a very, active person in resisting this sort of government overreach herself. I very much agree. And you, of course, have the wink of like both like he's saying like this coffin that I'm delivering is for the head of state. But also it's kind of like who's going to be the next person in a coffin? Could this coffin be for the head of state? Right. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I almost want to listen to that song more than I'm going to listen to it all, but
you should
want to hear that song more than Zombie now.
All are good. And all of them, like you'll jump in being like, oh man, like expecting I'm going to get this very, like he's going to launch right into it and tell me what happened. But no, you'll only get there after like a good 8 minutes of groove.
Well, at least I'll be warmed up.
Good old fashioned groove, which is amazing groove. And I've been focused more politically here than I typically would be in terms of talking about music. But I should mention Tony Allen is his band leader. That's like totally responsible for creating the genre Afrobeat. And Tony Allen did all sorts of stuff after this. He played with Gorillaz and like all sorts of stuff. He's a very active dude.
I know that name for sure. I'm assuming it's probably because of Gorillaz. Most likely.
And there's a bunch of others too, but yeah, he's Fela's drummer in this period, so he's very much around. So after Coffin for head of state, he decides subsequently that he's going to run for president.
Oh, okay, all right,
of Nigeria.
All right,
yeah. So he starts like kind of trying to drum up support. And he starts like the Movement of the People Party to sort of try to counter the military regime. And if I recall right, there hadn't been elections for like 10 years because military control. What do you need a stinking election for? The guys with the guns have it.
That's right. Vote for me or else.
Right. Exactly. Mm-hmm. So he, says that he's going to run for president. And he also, at this point, like this drums up a lot of attention for him. So he starts to do a lot more international touring. There's a great live record from Europe at the same time in '77. He's touring America. He's kind of going all over and spreading this, this kind of message. And that, I think, is always the difficulty with like an oppressive regime when you have some little gadfly like this, is like you've got all the power in your area. But then you've got like an internationally famous artist going everywhere and taking their message to everywhere else in the world. And those people are going to believe him and not the people with the guns in Nigeria who are very far away from you in Germany or Los Angeles or whatever.
I mean, it's hard to believe. So if you look at that government from the outside looking in, and you can kind of see what they're doing, not exactly, but you see like, oh, this is a military coup that happened. And now the military's in charge of that never seems to go well. I don't believe anything they say, right? I just automatically don't believe them because most of those situations have a history of not being forthcoming at all. So why would I believe them over the artist?
Totally.
Who has everything to lose by saying this stuff, by the way. The military has nothing to lose by saying, no, it didn't happen. Didn't happen. Like internationally, there's one side that is going to be taken by the vast majority of the population.
Yep. And that's exactly what it kind of does. So it continues to sort of build pressure over here in Nigeria, like just constantly. I think every morning he's like, Fela Kuti, you just keep ruining everything for me. But they do.
I would have got away with it too. It wasn't for that meddling Afrobeat musician.
Precisely. So, they do fight back, and he's banned from the presidential race by the aforementioned people with all the guns. There was a story that I heard around this time, and this one, like I say, is more apocryphal because I'm not sure the exact reason why. But around this time, he's playing a festival that he does, and his whole band quits like right after the show. And I'd heard it originally as that like Tony Allen and them found out that like all of the money from this was going to go to fund his political campaign, and they didn't like that. I've heard some other reasons. I think it's one of those band things. You never really know what's happening inside of a band.
And everybody has their own version of the truth. And
many years later, they're like, here's what happened. And you never really know exactly why.
Right. Yeah. And it's probably somewhere in the middle, most likely. But then again, I've said this before when band drama occurs. If it's everybody versus one guy, the one guy is probably the problem.
There's probably something there. Yes. Yeah. But I do want to also note there was a secondary response that doesn't totally translate to me, but it was seen as very powerful at the time inside of Nigeria. On the 1-year anniversary of his mother's death, or of the raid on the compound, I'm not sure which one, he has a subsequent protest, which is to marry 27 of his backup singers all at once.
So he's got his own interesting agendas as well.
Well, yeah, and like I've read about this over the years, and it's like seen as like another sort of like political act. Though I'll be honest, I think that there's like some cultural translation there that's a little bit hard, because I'm like, it doesn't seem like a middle finger to the general. Exactly.
Not exactly. It seems more like I like ladies.
Yeah,
that's what it seems like to me. I don't know.
As far I tried to dig into it a little bit, and as far as I was kind of able to figure out, like the tradition inside of Nigeria at the time was that like if a woman was in some way left indigent, like either as a widow or something or other, it was like tradition for the successful man to like marry her, to like take her in, to care for her, as more of like an economic than necessarily a sexual relationship.
Okay.
And so in some way he was doing this with like a lot of these women to show like, I will care for, I don't know. That's the best I've been able to do.
I think your observation was accurate. There's definitely something lost in translation here that I'm not understanding. Also, I mean, again, I'm just learning about all of this right now in real time, but my wheels are turning pretty quickly, and maybe inaccurately. But I get the vibe that he was kind of a weird dude.
Well,
So
I mean,
there's
yes. I mean, yes. It's difficult because like you're also like he's drawing on a lot of like tribal traditions that like do feel weird to a Westerner. Also, but yeah, he's a little weird and a little psychedelic at the same time.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that as even necessarily a bad thing. As a fellow kind of weird dude, he just seems like a weird dude.
There's so like one example of this that I'm just like paraphrasing this because it's off the top of my head and not in my notes. But in one of his songs in the recording, he's like talking at the beginning. I think it's live, so he's explaining, and he says like this song is like inspired by or influenced by this particular West African saying, and he says it, and then he translates it, and it translates to it is because of her beauty that the woman carries her breasts when she runs.
And
then he's like, and that's what this is about. And then and I'm like, I always listen to that. I'm like, I don't know that I get the moral of that one.
Yeah.
Like I literally understand what he's saying, but like it's presented as sort of a like, I hadn't thought of it like that.
It's not a parable that I quite resonate with, I guess. Like I said, I physically understand what's happening in this image, but I don't know what you're actually trying to say by it. So
yeah,
I'm just gonna go with it.
This happens when you're like diving outside of like American, European, cultural music, which is always fun. I mean, even like the man who carries death in his pouch sounds a lot cooler than the man who carries death in his backpack.
It does. Yeah.
Though that sounds kind of neat too. I don't know.
Pouch sounds more like you're ready to backpack. You got to get it off your back. You got to rumble through it and find it. If you got death in a pouch, a fanny pack per se, it's ready to go.
Right there.
I've met a couple old dudes that carry death in their pouch. Let's just put it that way.
I think we all have. We all have it. And Fela does have several sons, Femi, and it's spelled like Sean, but I think it's Siun, that are still out playing music at this time. He forms a new band in 1980. At this time, when I say that, I mean Femi and Chun are playing music now, and still very much involved. And I'm going off script a little here to tell you about the rest of the story. But when his band all quits in like 1979, around this, he forms a new band. So his original band was Africa 70 from 1970, and then his new band is called Egypt 80. Formed in 1980. So I guess he just was on track to form a new band every year. Or I'm sorry, every 10 years.
Every decade? Yeah.
Which all is, right. Fits about all right. And he kind of like a big point for him after that became Africa reclaiming Egyptian heritage. Because in a lot of ways, like European Western world kind of claims Egypt as like almost a Greco-Roman thing. And his point was like, no, this happened in Africa. This is like the big civilization before anyone was doing anything cool in Europe. It was right here. So that's why he named it Egypt 80.
I see.
Egypt 80 is still out
sense.
Touring with either Femi or Shun. I'm not sure which one.
Okay.
Anyway, so in 1984, skipping many years forward, he's like imprisoned for real. They basically like imprison him, saying that he was violating, like smuggling currency into foreign markets. He wasn't, but they'll get you where they can get you. And he serves 20 months this time. So it's like,
oh, wow.
Real prison. They got him.
Real Nigerian prison, which I don't think is a place I want to find out much about firsthand.
No, it sounds like a shorthand of like where you wouldn't want to be. I don't want to be in a Nigerian prison.
Listen, you can go to prison. We got two options for you, Mr. Marquardt. You're guilty, We can send you to prison in Canada or Nigeria. Which one do you want to pick?
Canada.
Yeah,
though it's cold. Still Canada.
It's cold. Still Canada.
I pondered for a moment, but then you're right. I think it'd be Canada.
I like poutine. Send me up there.
I somehow knew in my heart that you'd be one of the people that say it poutine.
Isn't that how you say it?
I've always read it more as poutine and not as the poutine.
Oh, well, I am a redneck. So if it can be rednecked, I will redneck it.
I'll neck it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Neck it.
So anyway, there's not too many points left in the history, here, but basically he gets out of prison in 1986. Basically every time they did something to this guy, he comes back out of it with even more international notoriety and acclaim, which is a thing that happens a lot when you're trying to oppress a very creative and interesting, musician or writer or anything. Right.
Yeah, totally.
And as you might expect, he never gave up on continuing to criticize the crap out of the Nigerian government. He did that the whole way through, even with more fame and whatnot, and then did finally pass away in 1997. And he was buried there in Lagos, and over 1 million people attended his funeral. So it was this massive, massive thing.
Wow. I'm hoping that I get 4 or 5.
If 4 or 5 people really care enough, that's probably enough, right?
1 million's a lot of people.
1 million's a ton of people.
That is, you can't even see what's going on. You're in the back. I was hoping I can't even hear the service from back here.
Yeah, I'd have to do the math, but I'm like, if you just how much time would it take to spend 5 minutes each talking to 1 million people?
Yeah.
Would you have time in your whole lifetime? I don't know.
More time than I have. That's what I was about to say. Yeah. It's that is crazy. He seems to be, this is going to sound worse than I mean it, but he seems to be real good at getting a lot of people to show up wherever he is.
That's a really good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, his band just kept growing. I mean, there were dozens of people at some point, like Earth, Wind, and Fire on stage, or something. People just follow the guy.
Mm-hmm. He must have been a very magnetic person. I have to imagine. So. He's probably one of those people when you're around him, you're like, I don't know what it is, but I like that guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Or I'm going to do whatever he tells me. I don't know why, but I'm going to.
Right. Which could be good, could be bad. Mm-hmm. But in this case, I think it was mostly good from what I gather. Yeah.
But there's a lot of sort of legacy that transpires after this. Like even back at the time, Bootsy Collins said he heard Fela Kuti in the 70s and was like, these are the funkiest people I've ever seen. And he's like, I played in James Brown's band. Right. And this is funkier than we are. He was always really loved and respected, but by a slightly more of a niche market in Western countries. But even today, Beyonce is a huge fan of Fela Kuti. She allegedly recorded a whole album once of very deeply Fela Kuti inspired music, but then didn't quite put it out.
Really?
Which would be interesting to hear.
It would be. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know anything more about it than that. I do also know that Idris Elba, your wife's favorite actor.
Yes, and
due to his dramatic flair exclusively.
Isn't he every wife's favorite actor?
That's very possible.
Yeah, I think so.
He's a huge fan. He actually made this whole box set of Fela Kuti's records recently. I was listening on Spotify and I was like, oh, there's a cool there's a new collection of all this sort of stuff, and it was produced by Idris Elba.
Okay,
why not? I secretly think that he just really wants to play him in a movie. He kind of looks like Idris Elba. I mean, kind of.
More
than I look like Idris Elba, but but a fair bit. You could imagine he would be a natural fit to play that role.
Yeah. I mean, it's probably down to if you're trying to pick, it's Mr. Elba, me, or Danny DeVito. That's basically your best options here. Right.
This is a real aside, but since we're winding down over here, I think we can we can reach out a little bit more. Actors that are really big fans of musicians and are sort of lobbying to play them in movies is very much a thing.
Oh yeah,
Michael Shannon is the one that I know of who really wants to play Iggy Pop. in a movie.
Oh,
he
I would watch that.
Well, so you can find a YouTube video of Michael Shannon. He like did like a tribute performance somewhere where he's like very much acting and dressed as Iggy Pop and also singing all the songs. And he does it justice. As weird as it is to like picture Michael Shannon shirtless and dancing like that.
I can see it. I can see it in my brain.
He does a pretty good job with it. In fact, did you see, and this is, we're just diving further down the wormhole, but recently in REM world, there was much ado because the like original 90s lineup of REM came together to play one song live.
Yes.
Again, you saw this?
Mm-hmm.
So for the listeners that don't know, it happened in Athens, which is of course like the birthplace of REM. But it's hilarious to me where it happened. Do you know where and why?
No, that part.
Okay, this is gonna get great. Yeah. So if you've been thinking to yourself, Michael Shannon hasn't been in any movies for a little while, as I have, because I rather enjoy Michael Shannon. Well, the reason is because Michael Shannon is touring his own covers of REM's catalog.
I did know that. You know why I know that? Because a friend of the gear world and comedian Dave Hill has been, and he's played our strings, by the way, did a few dates with him.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where this happened, actually. It was a Michael Shannon show in Athens of Michael Shannon performing REM music. That was the thing that got the original lineup of REM to like, it was at his show that they all like came on stage and did one song.
That's amazing. Together. I love that.
I was reading the article. I was like, oh man, REM played a song at a show of Michael Shannon doing covers of REM songs.
I want to go to that so bad. That sounds like a blast.
That sounds like a very good time.
Mm-hmm.
Where were we? We surfed way off and off.
We did, but you did end at his funeral. So unless there's more to go off of after he's passed, I mean, I'm not sure. Is there more to the story?
Well, I'm sure there's always more to the story, but that's where my version of the story ends, except to reflect and say, calling it punk is my own kind of invention here. That's just how it resonates to my sort of understanding of music. Afrobeat is like an incredible genre in its own right. But as I was like, I've loved Fela for a long time, but as I was preparing for this episode, I was thinking, I was like, oh man, that was 1977. And this is like the most like such an incredible ballsy political act connected to music, like one of the most that I can think of ever. Sticking that big middle finger up and very much paying the price for it. But it's still having the desired effect. And I was looking at those years and I was like, that's crazy. This is the same time as like anarchy in the UK, that as like a kid in the US, I'm like, that's a real political statement they're making there.
Right. Meanwhile, they don't know, like, well, more specifically Sid Vicious, but I was going to say they don't know what day it is, basically.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
There's no concern for consequences, and here there being such a severe concern for consequences, and still you just being like, I'm going to write this song and it's going to be amazing and I'm going to put it out and we're going to see whatever happens.
We're going to see what happens. Yeah, that is a crazy story. Good pull. I love it when it's something that I like when I do know a little bit about it, because we can go back and forth, but I like more than anything being educated on new stuff. So, well, new to me.
I'm here
stuff.
for you.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
I love the whole Fela Kuti catalog. It's very deep, just because each song is so long, and he was doing stuff for a really long time. But Zombie's amazing. Like Zombie's a super amazing song. Water No Good Enemy is like probably his most popular song. Expensive Shit I love. My favorite song of his, I believe, is called Gentleman, which is a similar thing. Like he's basically saying like, I won't be a gentleman, which is a very punk thing itself. He's saying like, I'm not going to wear that suit. I'm not going to wear that shirt or that tie or anything. From his perspective, he's saying like, I'm not going to endorse Western values. I'm not going to be an English gentleman. I'm an African man. But it feels kind of the same, right? As like the Sex Pistols ripping off a tie and being like, I'm not going to be some banker,
Yep. I'm not doing that. Yeah. I like it. This is fascinating. And yet now I got more stuff to go dive into, which is not, admittedly, not stuff I probably would have ever found. Most likely.
Oh, give it enough time.
Well, yeah, I guess give it enough time and enough curiosity, I'll find everything at some point. But It was not something that I would have immediately like sought out. I know a little bit. I've listened to a little bit of Afrobeat, but nowhere near enough to say I'm super familiar with it. So,
well,
yeah.
Now you've got something to dive into between now and next week when we talk about whatever it is you're going to talk to me about.
Yeah, we will see. I've got a couple different things brewing. I'm not sure which way I want to go yet, but yeah, it'll be good.
I like our newer tradition of it's nice to know going in, but it's kind of fun to just be randomly surprised. Maybe.
I'm trying. What I try to do is if I think you need to know or need to do something, I will let you know. But if not, let's just fly by the seat of our pants. See what happens.
That sounds good. In the meantime, I'll just be over here kicked back, listening to whatever weird shit I'm listening to, unless you tell me to listen to something differently.
All right. Well, man, I've got that actually reminds me. I got some research and notes to do. So I guess we'll sign off. What do you think?
That sounds all right to me.
All right, cool. All right, folks, you know what to do. Do your part, leave a heart. Come on, like, review, all that stuff. Wherever you're listening or wherever you're watching, please subscribe or follow or whatever. We're trying to put this on every single platform. So, help us out, because the more people that do that, the more inspiration we'll have to keep cranking out episodes. So yeah, because otherwise we'd be like out there making bass strings or something.
I got nothing else to do.
Yeah, I know. You have nothing else to do with the 30 people that work there. Anyway. All right, folks. Thank you very much. We'll talk to you all again next week.